Good evening. Welcome to our Puya Professional Organization of Iranian-Americans monthly lecture series. I would like to extend my profound appreciation and gratitude to our distinguished speaker, Dr. Zhabiz Kazeminezhad, whose presence I am indebted to Dr. Camelia Alavi, who is a board member of Puya. Ladies and gentlemen, our Puya supporters and donors, and the members of the board of Puya. For those who do not know, Puya is an affiliate of Kanun and is a non-religious, non-political, and purely an independent organization which holds monthly lectures by scholars in different sciences to give us a wide spectrum of different sciences in addition to humanities and cultural topics, glorifying our culture, culture of Iran. All the Puya lectures are in English so that the American and international professionals and young Iranian Americans who unfortunately do not know Farsi be able to participate. In addition to this, every year, Puya has an annual gala giving awards to some brilliant Iranian students from different fields, from different universities. This year, our gala is on January 25, 2025. Puya works tirelessly to uphold the pillars of its mission. Number one, to create a sense of synergy within the population of Iranian Americans, to provide an opportunity for Iranian American professionals to network and support each other. Number three, to provide other forms of advice such as internship, career counseling, financial support in a few cases, etc., to support our young professionals. Number four, to become an anchor of support while creating a channel for Iranian American professionals to share their accomplishments, experiences, etc. Number five, to help the next generation of Iranian professionals to succeed and prosper. Number six, to promote a positive image and counter the negative media depiction of Iran and Iranian people. حال به معرفی مختصری از خانم دکتر ژابیز می‌پردازم. Dr. Zhabiz Kazeminezhad received her bachelor's degree from the University of California at Irvine in 1995, where she was a board regents scholar and a member of camp-wide honors program. She received her medical degree from Drexel University College of Medicine in 2002. She completed her residency in general adult psychiatry at Thomas Jefferson University Hospital in 2006, where she received the Excellence in Outpatient Psychiatry Award. She's a board certified general adult psychiatrist. Most recently, she's staff psychiatrist at Phoenixville Hospital, Tower Health, and assistant of professor of psychiatry at Drexel University College of Medicine. She's also involved in homeless outreach. Dr. Kazeminezhad's recent clinical interest involves the management of metabolic abnormalities and weight concerns. Tonight, Dr. Kazeminezhad will be talking about obesity and its ramifications. On behalf of Puya and Kanun, I extend our appreciation to Dr. Kazeminezhad for accepting our invitation for the second time to talk for us. Thank you, Dr. Kazeminezhad. We are all ears.
Oh, thank you. That was a very kind introduction. Let's get started on the slides. Can you see my slides?
No, not yet. You haven't shared them.
Oh, yeah. Now I have to share. Hold on. Okay, so let's talk about obesity. Let's start with a picture of America in 1973. And now let's compare it to a picture of America in 2011. Same beach. Take a look at the difference in the body habitus. So metabolic disease is the number one disease of our time. And it's not just affecting developed countries anymore. If you look, the rate of obesity in America has substantially increased, and the rate of severe obesity has also increased. Even more so. So in 1960, less than 15% of the US population had some degree of obesity. But by 2018, that number was over 40% of the population. So what is classified as obesity? So we use a measure that is a very rough measure of obesity called the body mass index, which is basically the weight in kilograms divided by the height in meters squared. So for most people, this is a reasonable assessment of their increased fat risk, because when we think about obesity, we're not thinking about weight, we're thinking about percentage of body fat. So it's better for populations because the BMI makes an assessment or an estimation of a certain amount of fat mass. The problem is when you're dealing with very muscular people, because a lot of very muscular people can be very heavy, but they don't have a lot of fat mass. So it can overestimate metabolic risks in very muscular people. But conversely, and this is a very big problem in Asian countries, it can underestimate risk in people who tend to have less muscle mass. So you can have what's considered a normal BMI, so a BMI of 22, 23, but they have 30% body fat, and they are at increased risk, even though they are technically within a normal BMI. So, but at a population level, it's a pretty good marker. So what are the diseases that are associated with what we call obesity? So a BMI greater than 29.9 or 30 and over. So there's over 200 diseases that are associated with obesity, and they're not minor diseases, everything from cancer to early death, but these are the ones that have been very strongly associated. High cholesterol, or what we call dyslipidemia, which is dysfunctional cholesterol, type 2 diabetes, coronary artery disease, cerebrovascular accidents, which is another way of saying strokes, cancer, gallbladder disease, COPD, which is not a small problem. It predisposes people to dementia. It predisposes people to heart attacks, osteoarthritis, and premature death that's not explained. So the good thing about the West is that we have also exported our obesity. So as of 2022, per the World Health Organization, there are less people who are dying from starvation than there are people who are dying from obesity. So in some ways, you can say this is a bit of a success that, we don't have starving children anymore, but we've replaced it with another problem. That's a better problem to have, but it's still a problem. So 735 million people worldwide suffer from malnutrition. They live on less than $1.50 a day, but over 1 billion people deal with obesity. And the United States is not the obesity capital of the world or the diabetes capital of the world. They are still the obesity capital. India is. So, and yes, India. And the reason that they don't have an obesity problem is because BMI of 23 starts the risk in India. So if they adjust for the fact that people from India and China tend to have more obesity related diseases at lower BMIs, there's more obesity in Asia at this point. So what is causing obesity to become a global problem? I mean, 200 years ago, you might have had 2 or 3% of the population who was obese. But what's creating the problem now? The real problem comes down to the fact that our ancient physiology is a mismatch for the modern world we live in. That's what it comes down to. That's the fundamental problem. So there's a lot of hypotheses, and some of it is there's some truth to a lot of it, and we're going to go through most of these. The first is the idea of the thrifty gene. So our bodies are hardwired to hold on to fat because famines were inevitable, and they were inevitable throughout most of human history. So we hold on to fat, but now we live in a world where there's no famine, so we never get to use up those fat stores. The fat stores accumulate and they become what we call oxidized and toxic. The second is a diet culture. As people have gained weight, they've started to increase this idea of food restriction. Extreme fluctuations lead to permanent slowing of the metabolism. And this is something that has been observed over 5-6 years. The metabolism is still slowed. Believe it or not, screens and lights at night, and we'll get into that, and ultra-processed foods is by far the biggest offender. High in refined starch and sugar without the fiber, vitamins, and minerals that can trigger satiety. So another serious problem in the modern world is medications. Medications drive obesity. 20% of obesity in the United States is directly related to medications. And look at the medication classes. They're medications that most people use: antidepressants, antipsychotics, antiepileptics that are used for a lot of things, not just for epilepsy, chemotherapy medications, medications for autoimmune illnesses, high blood pressure medicines, and ironically, because diabetes is an obesity disease, diabetes medications creates obesity, especially the older medications, including insulin. So what else? Do you guys see?
You see, yeah.
Yeah. I'm sorry. Okay. So let's keep going about our modern obesogenic environment. Sleep. So one of the things that we've noticed that they have seen is that blue light screens have shortened sleep time from 8.5 hours in the 1970s to 6.5 hours today. So why is this a problem? When people are sleep deprived, they have an increase in what we call cortisol, which is the stress hormone. Stress hormone causes an increase in cravings for sugary foods, but it also causes a decrease in what we call basal metabolic rate. So the amount of energy required for your body to kind of be alive, the liver, the heart, the kidney. But again, the biggest problem by far is the ultra processed foods. So how do ultra processed foods lead to obesity? Cheap refined carbohydrates cause an elevation in what we call basal insulin. So the way hormones work is that there's a level that's always pulsed, and then there's levels that are pulsed in response to a stimulus. So insulin is always around, but it also is released as a result of food intake. So what we call the basal insulin, so the insulin that's just in the system, is elevated as a result when people eat large amounts of refined carbohydrates. Insulin is what we call an anabolic hormone. So it's a hormone that it promotes fat storage. So when you have a higher level circulating in your blood, you're going to store more of the energy that you eat in the form of fat. So that is a serious problem. Another problem with ultra-processed foods is that it's nutritionally unsound. It doesn't have vitamins and minerals, or what we call micronutrients. So when your body doesn't get micronutrients, the brain signals to increase the appetite in order to leverage more food so that it can get the micronutrients it needs, the vitamins and minerals that it needs. And that promotes appetite. The lack of protein and fiber. So we're just starting to understand how much hormones exist inside the gut, and the way they promote satiety and hunger. When there's not enough protein and fiber, the gut actually doesn't get the signals it needs to slow down and stop craving food, and sending a signal to the brain that it's full. And last, there's a fair amount of evidence of what we call direct overstimulation of the reward centers of the brain. ultra-processed foods do hit the ventral tegmental area and the prefrontal cortex, and they hit the reward centers of the brain. The parts of the brain that light up are the same parts that light up when people use cocaine.
Mm.
So Nova started to classify food processing in the hopes that people would make better, more informed decisions about what food processing is and what's an ultra processed food. The group one is typically the unprocessed or natural foods. These are foods that are obtained directly from plants or animals, but it may include very minimal or what we call traditional processing, the processing that our ancestors did. So drying fruits and beans, fermenting milk to make yogurt, pasteurization, which is a little bit newer, but still within that concept, and then cooling and freezing, like frozen vegetables or frozen uncooked meat. Group two are what we call processed culinary ingredients. These have been part of the food supply for hundreds of years, but they're newer, and you can still recognize it for what it is. So these are natural foods that are pressed, ground, or crushed. So olive oil, fats, salt, even sugar, which is processed in a way that is, that our ancestors did. Honey, pure maple syrup, and olive oil are examples of group two of NOVA classification. So group three are processed foods. These are products that are manufactured by industry, but they are used the preservatives that are used are typically salt, sugar, or oil. They are derived directly from foods, and they can be recognized as versions of the original food. So a typical example is tomato paste, alcohol, canned meat, bread. We can still recognize these as foods, and we recognize, our ancestors were still able to make these. And then there's the ultra processed foods, and this is where we get into trouble, because our brains have not evolved to recognize these at all. So you have these industrial formulations made up of ingredients that have no what we call culinary use. So they're not a part of any kind of traditional cooking methods. High fructose corn syrups, hydrogenated oils, modified starch, isolated soy protein are example of ultra processed foods. The standard pre-industrial processing would not have been able to create this food. So a rule of thumb is if your grandmother couldn't create it, then it is an ultra processed food. Coke, potato chips, packaged TV dinners, that's typical. This is the concerning part. 70% of our children's diets now come from ultra processed foods. 60% of adults and people who consume ultra processed foods on average consume 500 more calories per day. That is an enormous amount of extra food. That's basically 4 or 5 pounds a year. So we have two competing models of obesity. Now, these models are not as mutually exclusive as they might look. So the first model is fairly straightforward, and it makes some sense. It's basically the law of thermodynamics. Energy balance model is what we call this. And this is the one that most people are familiar with. So the idea is that the reason why ultra-processed foods cause so much obesity is because they're calorie dense. They're high in portion size, fat, sugar, and low in protein and fiber that tends to have relatively less calories per volume. So as this goes to the brain, you overeat, you have less, you exercise less, and you end up with what we call adipose tissue storage. So there is no question that human beings follow the law of thermodynamics. We are all doing an energy balance model. But a more interesting model is the carbohydrate insulin model, which really addresses the question of why do we overeat? What are the hormones that are involved in overeating? So yes, obviously, we're not immune to the laws of thermodynamics, but why is it that we can't stop eating? Because it was not, there's a common misconception that we gain as much fat as possible because it made sense. But the reality is that humans before medicine, we couldn't be that fat because we couldn't be mobile. So the human body actually regulates weight at a very tight level. And the question is, how did we lose control of this weight regulation? And people are getting to be 500, 600 pounds, because that would not have been sustainable in nature. So what carbohydrate insulin model of obesity says is that most of obesity is driven by insulin. That's not the only hormone, but that's the primary hormone. So when you eat a food that pushes the blood sugar up, what we call a high glycemic load food, high sugar, something that what you have is an increase in insulin. And more importantly, there's an increase in insulin, which drives sugar out of the bloodstream in response to glucagon, which brings sugar into the bloodstream. And then you have a drop in hunger hormones, GIP, to what we call GLP-1. And what happens is that the body gets pushed into what's called fat storage mode. And when when the body gets pushed into fat storage mode, the foods that's circulating through the body goes into the fat cells and it can't be used for energy. So that sends a signal to the brain that you don't have enough calories in the bloodstream, even though you just ate. But because insulin was high and it pushed all those calories into the fat cells, your brain is getting the signal that there's not enough food, and that's what leads to overeating. So what are some of and there's been a lot of diets that have come out for both of these models. The dietary approaches that are based on the energy balance model is mostly what we call a low fat or very low fat model. The idea is that you eat foods that are higher in volume, lower in calories, and in the hopes that you get filled enough that or just the time of eating that you can't consume that much food, so it just naturally limits your calories. Typically, they recommend a much lower percentage of your diet coming from fat, so 10 to 25%. It tends to emphasize plant foods. It limits oils because oils are very calorie dense. And some of the popular diets that are based on the energy balance model are Ornish, vegetarian, the Mediterranean diet, some forms of the Mediterranean, not all of them, and what we call meal replacement. So what are the dietary approaches that are based on the insulin carbohydrate model? So the idea here is to drive down carbohydrates so you don't get an insulin response. So at least less than 45% of your calories should come from carbohydrates. To give you an estimate of what that means, the average amount of carbohydrates in the modern American diet is over 60%. But some people will say even less than that. Make it less than 5% of your calories coming from carbohydrates. So the mechanism of weight loss here is reduced blood insulin levels, which insulin is an anabolic hormone. Anabolic means that it puts tissue or body fat on you, that promotes appetite and fat storage. In general, in general, diets that are informed by the insulin carbohydrate model tend to show better improvement in not just weight loss, but also in multiple metabolic factors, including diabetes. But the problem is that they tend to be less sustainable long-term because people do miss carbohydrates. So common types are Atkins, Paleolithic, and intermittent fasting, because the idea of intermittent fasting, even though you can call it a calorie restriction diet, but the idea is that you can eat as much as you want, but you want to have insulin levels low through most of the day. So you eat and then you let the insulin levels drop, and then you eat, 6-7 hours later. So what is ketosis? And we're going to get into the ketogenic diet. There are 3 major macronutrients: carbohydrates, protein, and fat. The bulk of the modern human diet comprises of carbohydrates. Modern humans, but this was not the case through most of human history. Through most of human history, people got most of their calories from fats. When the body does not have enough carbohydrates to burn for energy, it turns to dietary or body fat. So the body will always prefer to burn carbohydrates, but if they're not around, it will turn to fats. The breakdown of carbohydrates, fat, and protein for fuel requires 3 different metabolic fat pathways. And fat depends the least on insulin, which is why the ketogenic diet tries to lower carbohydrate levels to the point where it forces the body to utilize its own fat. Some people have said this is not a natural state, but here's the interesting thing. All babies are born into ketosis. All babies are born burning fat. So, what are the hormones that are involved in hunger? And I don't know if you guys can see this, but through the fat cells, you have a hormone called leptin. Leptin causes people to feel satiated, so they decrease their foods. The adrenal glands release steroids, which promotes hunger, but it also releases a neurotransmitter called norepinephrine, which generally decreases hunger. The stomach releases ghrelin, which increases hunger. Believe it or not, the ovaries and testicles release estrogen, which decreases hunger, which is why a lot of times women gain weight after menopause. The hypothalamus, which is the hunger part of the center of the brain, releases both neuropeptide Y and they both promote hunger. And finally, so the pancreas releases glucagon, which decreases hunger, and they releases insulin and somatostatin, which promotes hunger. So this is the area that is starting to affect the GLP-1s or Ozempic and some of the newer medications. We did not realize how hormonally active our gastrointestinal tract is. So take a look at this, and I think this says something about how much our bodies do try to control our hunger, and it's not normal to be hungry all the time. You have one hunger hormone in the stomach called ghrelin, and take a look at all of the different hormones that are there to decrease hunger in the human body. Peptide YY, which slows down the stomach. GLP-1, which slows down the stomach. Oxyntomodulin, which increases acid secretion. Polypeptide, which slows down the emptying of the stomach. And cholecystokinin, which increases bile and increases enzymes to be secreted from the stomach. All of these other hormones are designed just to kind of rein in ghrelin and control our appetite. So now we get to GLP-1, which is what Ozempic is. It's a GLP-1 agonist. So what does the actual natural hormone GLP-1 do in the body? It does a lot of very interesting things. Believe it or not, even though it decreases hunger, it increases insulin secretion, and we don't understand how that works because insulin is an appetite stimulating hormone. It also promotes what we call more cells in the pancreas. In the heart, it increases the amount of sugar that gets taken up in the cardiac cells, and they believe this might be one of the reasons why it confers some protection in the heart. It does increase the heart rate, but it drops the blood pressure. In liver, it promotes storage of sugar molecules for you when you need them. So it takes the sugar out of the blood and stores it. In the fat, it increases glucose, and it increases fat cell formation, which again, they don't understand how a GLP-1 agonist would cause weight loss when it promotes fat production. So that's something that they're trying to look at. In the muscle, it increases glucose uptake, and in the stomach, it delays stomach emptying. It generally slows down the gastrointestinal tract. So now we have hormones that are mimicking the GLP-1 that we naturally have in our gastrointestinal tract. So why GLP-1 agonists? The problem with the GLP-1s that our bodies make is that they only stay in the system for 1 to 2 minutes. So they attach and then they release. The medications, the GLP-1 agonists like Ozempic or Mounjaro that attach to these receptors, they stick around for days to weeks. So that is why the GLP-1 agonists work. So here's a list. Ozempic was not the first one of these class of medications that came onto the market, but it was the first one that was extremely effective in slowing down the gastrointestinal tract and increasing feelings of fullness. The first one was exenatide or Byetta, and then there was Trulicity, there was Victoza, which still gets used, but it's a daily injection, Adlixin, and then now we have the second generation, what's called tirzepatide, or which is also known by the trade name Mounjaro or Zepbound, which is even more effective. The ones in bold are FDA approved for obesity. The rest of them are used off-label. So this is the chicken versus egg question. GLP-1 agonists are not just for diabetes and obesity. Now there are clinical trials running that are assessing it for lowering blood pressure, improving what we call dyslipidemia, improving fatty liver disease, which is a serious epidemic in this country, reduces risks for heart disease, and delays the progression of diabetic kidney disease. The chicken and egg question is, what came first? Is this all because it treats these are the downstream consequences of untreated obesity and diabetes? Or is this because of the direct effects of the GLP-1 agonists on the cells of these different parts of the body? We don't really know the answer to that. So this is unbelievable. I mean, before we had these medications, the only way you could get this kind of weight loss was with surgery. It was just not possible any other way. So if you look, 15 milligrams of tirzepatide, and this isn't 22 pounds, this is 22% of your body fat. So if someone is 200 pounds, that's 40 pounds. I mean, if someone is 200 pounds, they're losing 40 pounds. So after 72 weeks, it does look like it stabilizes after about a year and a year and a few months. But the weight loss slows significantly after 24 weeks. Most people, if they're going to respond, they continue to respond to the medicine. These medications have really made a huge difference in the way we manage obesity, but they're not without their consequences. Unlike weight loss, say using the ketogenic diet, which is high in protein, the weight loss that comes with these tends to be disproportionately affecting muscle mass. And that's not a minor issue, because muscle mass, the loss of lean muscle mass can have long-term consequences. So one of the biggest consequences is that when you lose muscle mass, the sugar in your blood doesn't have a place to go. The biggest storage site for sugar in the blood is muscle. And the more muscle you lose, that'll drive up your blood sugars.
Oh my God.
Yes, and muscle is much more metabolically active than fat. So if you're losing muscle mass, you're actually going to slow your metabolism. So, and when you lose muscle mass, and this is also very concerning, especially in the geriatric population, you have what's called increased frailty. So you're more prone to falls, your grip strength slows down, gets worse. If there's a fair amount of evidence that loss of muscle mass can predict death in the geriatric population. Does that mean that you shouldn't use it? Well, not really. Just be aware of some of the potential problems, because data to 10 years with the older medications shows that these medications are generally safe. So even though we're really slowing down the gastrointestinal tract, even though these medications have effects on cells all over the body, that doesn't seem to have any, at least medium-term effects. So what are some other medications for obesity that have different mechanisms of action? There's stimulants that work on the dopamine system. It's called phentermine or diethylpropion. There is a new medication called Contrave, which works directly in the reward centers of the brain. So it's good for people who have more emotional eating, or there's an addiction model. So naltrexone we often use for alcohol use disorder. Bupropion is an antidepressant, the two together. There's another one called Qsymia, which is a combination of phentermine, which affects the reward centers, and topiramate, which is an anti-epileptic, which tends to decrease appetite with mechanisms that we're not entirely familiar with. Orlistat is an interesting little medication. What it does is it basically causes what we call fat malabsorption from the gastrointestinal tract. So your stomach, your intestines don't absorb fat. So you defecate it out. And metformin is a diabetes medicine. It's used off label. It's not very effective, but we do use it, especially to counteract some of the medication related obesity, like for medications like antidepressants and antipsychotics. Metformin has been shown to be fairly helpful. So in summary, obesity is a modern problem driven by a mismatch between our ancient human physiology and the modern environment we live in. Obesity is not just a cosmetic problem. It is an independent risk factor for over 200 medical conditions. There are two major models of obesity: energy balance and the insulin carbohydrate model. The insulin carbohydrate model seems to be a bit more nuanced, and the diets that are related to that model tend to be more effective. In either case, you can see that hormones are major mediators of obesity, and they mediate it mostly through the regulation of appetite. GLP-1 agonists are the strongest medications we have. They improve more than just diabetes and obesity, but they do have concerning drawbacks. And that is the end.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. So much information. Oh my God, that was beautiful. Thank you.
Oh, you're
Thank you so much. And I have a million questions,
Okay,
I'll
please.
ask one question, then I'll let Dr. Alavi ask her question, then I have other questions. Let's say Ozempic, of course, thank God, I don't need it. However, those people who use Ozempic, so they use it, they lose weight, I mean, number one, is it really safe, because does it hurt the body? The other one is that what if, they stop it, of course, it's also costly. What if they stop it? Once they stop it, are they going to gain their weight again?
So the bottom line is that these medications are too new. We don't know. So
Dr. Zhabiz has to just, yeah.
So we don't know what's going to be the 20 years, 30 years. You know, there's two things that are already, we know are going to be concerning. The first is the fact that the mechanism of action of these medications that it very much slows the gastrointestinal tract. We don't know what that's going to mean long term. I mean, are we going to end up with paralyzed gastrointestinal tracts if we're on this for 30 years? The second is that with the kind of calorie restriction that comes from these medications, you have a disproportionate problem with muscle loss. And what is that going to mean as geriatric people go into old age? So far, the data seems to indicate that at least for 10 years, it's not too much of a problem. But you know, the life expectancy is going up. Someone who's 50 years old can conceivably be on these medications for 30 years or more. And the answer is we simply don't know. We don't know what 30 years of these medications are going to do. The initial data seem to indicate that once you stop the medicine, it comes back. That's starting to be questioned a little bit. It does seem to have some resetting systems in the hormonal system in the body, and a substantial portion of the people do not gain the weight back. It seems that if you do weight training or physical activity, if you use the time that you're off on these if you use the time that you're on these medications to change some lifestyle habits, promoting lower insulin levels and you know, being careful about ultra processed foods, there is a substantial number of people who don't gain the weight back. And there was one recent study out of Europe, I don't remember which country, where 25% of the patients actually continued to lose weight. But they were part of a structured program that taught them how to live their lives on the other side of the Ozempic. So